Men, aggressive, physical, competitive, risk-takers. Women, graceful, gentle, emotional, nurturers. I'm Nathan Wallace. I'm about to step into one of the most controversial areas in all of neuroscience. We're doing a documentary on the difference between males and female brains. So do you think there's a difference?
Yeah.
I think there is a difference.
We're made up of two totally different makeups, aren't we?
I reckon that males have different skill sets than females.
Men are more superior.
Okay, right. Is anyone superior? Do men and women think differently? And if they do, is it because our brains are built differently? I'm a neuroscience educator, and I spend my working life teaching people about the developing brain. The question I get asked the most is, why do girls and boys behave differently? If we do behave differently, how much of that can we see happening inside our brain? That's what I want to find out, and to do it, I'll be putting babies down ramps, chucking trucks at chimps, racing cars around tracks, and putting my own body on the line.
Check this out.
To start with, I'm heading back to the place where my own journey began. And now it's internationally recognised as a centre for neuroscience research. I'm here at Otago University, the oldest university in New Zealand. It's kind of a full circle journey for me because this is where I went to university and trained as a teacher. It's kind of ironic that I would come back to the very place that started my interest in neuroscience to find out what are the latest neuroscience research findings. The study of sex differences in the human brain is complex, controversial, and emotionally loaded. Popular culture bombards us with stereotypes around how different men and women are. So my first question is, are there any physical differences in the hardwiring of our brains?
This is the powerhouse. This is where it all happens in the lab.
Well, if you analyse thousands of thinly sliced mice brains, in some ways, the answer is yes.
There are groups of neurons that are 20-fold more, say, in females than they are in males. And we know that those particular neurons are controlling hormones for fertility, for example. This particular population of neurons is responsible for a sex hormone event that happens only in females.
It makes sense that our very different roles in reproduction would have different control structures. Alan's talking about a small part of what's called our emotional brain that controls some of our instincts, the hypothalamus. We do have other basic emotions and instincts, of course.
So if you go back and you look into animal studies, in the brain, in the hypothalamus, there are brain areas that are involved with controlling male sexual behaviour. And people may or may not be aware that in sheep, about 10% of male sheep are essentially gay.
Right. I don't think people were aware. I wasn't aware of that.
So about 10% of male sheep actually will not mate with females, and they'll only try and mate with males.
That's fascinating.
And so if you look at those sheep, you can now look at the same brain area, and in the rams that want to mate with other rams, it actually looks like a female part of the brain.
Okay.
The people working in this area are now fairly convinced that when you were born, you're going to have a brain imprinting that is going to have some impact actually on whether you turn out to be heterosexual or homosexual.
Sorry, this is not good news for all the people that think you can cure it, then.
It is not good news.
What makes us humans different from most animals is that the largest part of our brain deals with complex behaviour, our intellect. It's much more than animal instinct, and it's harder to study because you can't just run around cutting them up.
We also have sex differences, which are the things that, you know, we find caricatured on advertisements. You know, I mean, the men stand around poking sausages at the barbecue, and all the wives are making salad chatting in the room. You know, that sort of thing. You know, so those are not so much physiological. That's more behavioural differences in how we get on in the world, and that's a much more difficult area to be able to pin down a brain area that's responsible for those.
To help pin that down, I'm off to the Anatomy Museum. So, Cynthia, can we look at this and tell, is this a male or a female?
Yes, it is. It's either one.
Yeah, okay. It is a male or a female?
Yes.
Is there anything you can look at by this and tell me that's a female brain?
No.
No?
If I had a whole bunch of them, and this one was significantly smaller, I might say, well, out of 100 brains, this is a smaller one, so maybe it's a female brain.
But it could also be an adolescent
could
or
be
a
an
child.
adolescent,
Yeah, right.
a
Okay.
child.
Well, the whole body's, I suppose, of a male is larger, so is it just an extension of that?
A lot of people have argued that, well, you know, legs are bigger, shoulders are bigger, of course the head's going to be bigger.
Okay.
And the brain will fill the space.
Right. Yeah. What is that volume? Just
About
different?
10%.
Right, and that correlates with 10% more intelligent, does it, Cynthia?
No.
No, doesn't stand up in the IQ research, does it? So.
No.
In her book about the female brain, Cynthia highlights an interesting gap in a lot of medical research.
In a lot of cases, particularly early experimental studies, it's the brain of a really healthy 20-year-old male who has no known diseases of any kind.
Right, yeah.
The males make good experimental subjects. They don't have an estrous cycle. They're hormonally stable. They're easy to use. The argument that was made was females are very frail. They can't possibly do an experiment. Their physiology's different.
Right.
Yes. So we won't use them. And then taking whatever the results are, whether it's a drug experiment or a surgical procedure, taking those results and then applying them to females.
Right.
So the female contraceptive pills were tested extensively on 20-year-old males.
I can see this is going to take a bit more scientific investigation. But before I do that, let's take a look at men and women in their natural habitat. What do the people think?
Men just think what's happening here and now.
Oh, we just seem to know a bit more, I think.
I think just how we analyse information.
Okay.
Tend to be more practical.
Women are good at multitasking.
Do you think there was anything that women were more intelligent at than men?
Housekeeping.
Housekeeping?
We're more hit up about how clean the house is or...
Right, okay,
that kind
I'm
of
with you.
stuff, yeah.
Whereas Dad doesn't tend
Whereas
to
Dad
care.
doesn't care, as often goes, don't worry about that.
Actually, my house is pretty tidy. But I want to know if these supposed differences in behaviour show up in actual brain function. What about my brain function? I'm about to see my brain for the first time. I'm excited and nervous. I'm on the hunt for any differences in the brain that might make us think and behave differently as men and women. So I've come to Auckland University to get my brain scanned, which explains the very nice gown. Functional MRI will measure activity in specific areas of my brain. Can it measure stress?
Nathan will be feeling claustrophobic. It feels a bit squeezed, and then the coil around your head is very close to you, and it's loud.
Ian's testing me for a skill where men and women are said to be different: communication.
What Nathan is seeing now is essentially this, a letter in the middle of the screen, and his task is to think of as many words as he can, beginning with that letter. Fortunately, for all of us, he doesn't have to tell us what those words might be, and then we'll be able to see whether he activates right or left, or a bit of both.
Studies show language processing mostly happens on the left side of our brain, but women tend to use the right side a little bit too.
You can see the left inferior frontal lobe activating very nicely, and this is where we'd most likely see activation in a language task of this sort. And you can see there's lots of activation here. But you can also see on the in the same place on the other side of the brain, there's a bit of activation there as well, so there's interaction.
If I was undergoing brain surgery, knowing where my brain processes things like language would be important information for the surgeon. So there would be less risk of damage to those areas in the process. 30 minutes later, time to find out how I've done.
Well done, Nathan.
Wow, yeah, it's an experience.
It will look good. Do you want to come and have a look at your brain?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. I talk for a job, so I'm kind of expecting that maybe I've got more of a female's language brain than a male's.
So you're better at language than the average male, you think?
I think so, yeah.
And perhaps disappointingly for you, Nathan,
yeah.
This is pretty asymmetric. I mean, there's most of your activity is on the left. There is a bit on the right, as we would expect, but this is I would suggest a pretty typical pattern for a typical male brain.
It might be disappointing for me, but it does match what people say females are better at.
Women are better at English and then men are kind of better at math. All girls like to talk about their feelings, don't they?
Women tend to be emotionally empathetic.
Women are more forward and they'll say that.
Emotion.
It feels from the heart, more sentiment.
But even if that's true, I think we need to look at the world around us to work out why we do some of the things we do as well. Does the language part of my brain look more male-like because I grew up building with blocks rather than talking to dolls? Is that something hardwired, that boys and girls are innately drawn to different toys? Or is it just social pressure and packaging? I've always been fascinated by the difference between nature and nurture, something neuroscience has been struggling to unravel for years. My next stop is at the zoo, where neuropsychologist Bart Allenbrook is helping me to replicate a famous experiment in this field. Chimps don't go to toy shops, and they can't watch TV, making them the perfect subjects for this experiment. Well, here we go. So what happens when you give them typically boy and girl toys? Primates shouldn't care if they're playing with a truck or a doll, right?
Yeah. And now he's picking up the truck. Yeah.
He seemed to like pick up the doll because it was the first thing he saw, right?
Yeah.
And he held onto that, and when he saw the truck, thought, I'll let go of it.
Yep.
Then immediately the female chimp that climbed up with the doll. Surprisingly, the original experiment, which has been repeated, did show that male monkeys seemed to prefer trucks, and the female monkeys went for dolls.
Oh, now the big man has found the big truck. And he's throwing it away.
We're seeing a similar thing with our chimps. There has been a little bit of a preference, though, do you think? There has been
so.
clear...
Yeah. The idea that males, even among monkeys, even among chimpanzees, would prefer wheeled toys, and females would prefer stuffed animals or stuffed toys, fluffy toys. That suggests that it is more biologically determined rather than socially determined. And it caused quite a stir when the studies came out.
So maybe we chalk one up for nature. In my work, I teach about the importance of those very early years for brain development. So I still want to explore the nurture side of this argument. Annette Henderson is a psychologist with an interest in how the brains of girls and boys are shaped from a very young age.
Some research suggests that at birth there are differences between males and females in terms of their brain structures, but I don't know of the research yet that has been able to link those differences to behavior or what they're doing. And the problem is as soon as babies come out of the womb, they're treated differently according to their gender. And so it's very hard to say that some of those things are biologically driven or driven socially because, as soon as we start, we do interact with them differently.
So in order to see how much the world around us can influence how we think and behave, we're replicating a couple more experiments.
Have a seat. So
We've recruited some psychology students to help us, but they don't realise they're the ones being studied.
So they think they're coming to help us with looking at early development and what children do when playing with strangers. Laura, this is Gemma and Charlie. Hi. So you guys are just going to play for a bit, okay?
We're actually looking for which toys they offer to which kids. The first few seconds are fascinating, you know, because I could see the baby go straight for the doll, but she offered the ball first.
Okay.
But no interest in the ball, so when the baby touched the doll, then she went for the doll. And there's another twist. What the students don't know is that we've dressed some of our girls in blue and boys in pink. You know, the baby didn't choose the truck, so the car, so really she has chosen the car.
But she did show interest in the doll, right, at the beginning. And immediately she's like, doll. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, true. Would it surprise you to find out that Jane's actually a Jack?
Jack?
Yeah. To get to the heart of the nature versus nurture debate, we're running an experiment to see how differently boys and girls are treated from a very young age. Remember, this is the age where our brain is shaped most rapidly by the experiences we have and what the world offers us. What the students don't know is that we've dressed some of our girls in blue and boys in pink to see if that makes a difference in how they're encouraged to play.
There we go.
Both these twins are actually boys.
Oh, ready? Whee!
But she offered it to him first.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That Emily showed an interest in the truck, so she's responding to that interest.
Silly! No, you want the car?
Emily, act like a boy. She had no interest in the doll and going straight with the truck.
Hello. Hello. No?
Keeps persisting with that doll, even though Emily is clearly wants the truck.
Yeah.
Come on, Emily. It's not one of those boys' toys. Let's see what the students think about the experiment.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Both of the twins are boys.
They're both boys. Okay,
Yeah, so
cool.
we just dressed one up as a girl.
Oh.
Would it surprise you to find out that Jane's actually a Jack?
Jack?
Yeah, so it's actually Jack.
Oh.
Mm.
But it's interesting to see now that he was preferring the dolls.
Reflecting back, do you think that would have influenced anything that you do?
I don't know. Like, I want to say it probably wouldn't, but it probably would, because, you know, it's very...
Yep.
Gender is entrenched in our social world.
Absolutely,
so,
and you'd be aware of that with your background and study.
Yeah, so maybe, possibly, if they were both girls, maybe I would have gone for the dolls more, but I don't know. I want to say that I wouldn't, and that I'd encourage them to play with any toys, but yeah, it's hard to kind of separate it. It's so...
It is. It's hard to differentiate the two, the nature-nurture and the chicken and egg.
So if you think of this brain, this brain comes out, and it's the same. Right? But then we've got social experiences, and you've got people who come visit the newborn baby, and they've got little stuffed doll, and they're like, here's this doll, right? To this little baby girl, and those neurons are firing and making those connections to, oh, this is what I like, because this is what I'm seeing.
The other experiment we're recreating looks at how expectations for boy and girl babies may be different. We've built a ramp, and we've asked the mums to estimate how steep a slope their baby can crawl down.
So what you get to do is you get to pick the height or the slope that you think Jack can successfully crawl down the ramp. Okay, so all you need to do is just wind that lever up to the height that you think that Jack can crawl. What's neat about this is boys and girls will crawl around the same time. The scientists' expectations was that the mums of girls consistently underestimated their baby girls' abilities. Right. The mums of the boys were actually more accurate in their assessment.
Okay.
So they didn't overestimate, they were just more accurate.
We're just underestimating the girls'
We're just underestimating the girls.
So that's a real clear example of imposing a belief from the outside. Will our mums do the same thing? With a few exceptions, we found that these mums push their boys to crawl at a slightly steeper slope than the girls.
Good job. Yay, good job, Isabella.
One thing we didn't measure was whether dads would have given us different results.
Good boy.
Whether we're aware of it or not, as parents, our beliefs are a strong influence on growing brains. Yes, there's a whole lot of parents now at home saying, no, I didn't. I treated them all the same. I mean, I was one of those parents that my daughter wasn't allowed a Barbie doll, and I was going to call her brave and strong.
Yep. You know, parents are one really important aspect of children's development and their lives, but they're not the only aspect that interacts with children. So we've got parents, we've got grandparents, friends, aunties, uncles, right? All of those people in the baby's lives, and many of those people like to also fuel those gender stereotypes. And then beyond that, you've got toys that children interact with, and the media, and lots of other social pressures. Your brain is plastic, and it learns things so rapidly.
Our brains are determined by exposure to environmental challenges. For instance, childhood trauma can affect our brain quite dramatically. So when we look at males and females when they are adults, they have gone through a whole series of exposures that have already changed their brains. And so by the time we get to see and study their brains in adulthood, it's a combination of everything that has happened from conception on until we reach that stage. So that makes it so complicated.
So taking all of that into account then, if I just fire stereotypical, you know, so if I'm saying men are more aggressive, if you're going to relate that to the brain, would you...
Testosterone. Yeah, absolutely.
Testosterone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. I mean, all the statistics show that if you look at prisons, the majority of people in prison are males. The majority of people that kill other people are males. There is no doubt about that.
Okay. Testosterone helps shape the male brain in the womb. As Bart said, it's linked to aggression. Males and females both have it. Men have a lot more. And some people say that's what makes men more competitive. To be good at car racing, you're supposed to be aggressive and a risk taker. Two things men are said to be innately better at than women. But the person driving this car is a woman. She represents New Zealand in Rally Driving International. We're going to run a little experiment to see if we can see testosterone in action. I'm supposed to fill up this whole vial full of spit. It actually is much harder than it looks. Right, I'm going to put lots of testosterone into this next mouthful. Go! This competition also tests another area men are said to be slightly better at, spatial awareness. In particular, rotating a 3D object through space. Kind of like this car on the racetrack.
All yours. 3, 2, 1.
Oh. Go, 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 go. Oh. Oh. It's pretty clear being a male isn't helping me here.
And stop! You just have to check out his parking.
Emma grew up on a car yard owned by her family. So if I don't have a natural advantage, she could certainly have a nurture advantage. Maybe I'm pumped with testosterone by then that I'm taking too many risks. So the idea is usually that men are, you know, linked to testosterone, men are more aggressive, and that gives us some advantage around competition. Has that been your experience?
I've only ever competed as a female, so, you know, so I don't know, but, you know, I think, you know, you are just another competitor. You know, you have different strengths and weaknesses, and, you know, growing up, it was just me and my sister and Dad was into cars, so, yeah, never saw any reason why it would be any different. I think women can be as skilled or as talented, but they probably just question or doubt themselves maybe a bit more.
Us guys are faking that confidence half the time.
Maybe.
Emma's testosterone levels went down during the race, and mine went up and stayed up. Professor Paul Hoffman is a specialist in hormones, and he's got an explanation.
Testosterone levels going up are not going to help your performance in this scenario. It's just too soon.
Okay.
It's a hormone that takes hours to days to show effects.
Oh, OK. Hours to days to take effect.
Yeah. I think what you're demonstrating in Emma is an exceptional human being rather than an exceptional woman or male. She's just very good at the driving. And whilst that is seen as more a male type of activity, there are many women who are very, very good at those sort of activities. And as I said, there's a spectrum that covers.
So if we looked at Emma's brain specifically, we might expect her to be quite good at spatial tasks.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's not related to her exposure to male hormone or female hormone, but just related to the genes she's inherited and the environment she's exposed herself to, and she's become exceptionally good at what she does.
Right. From toy choice to career choice, every experience we have, everything we're exposed to, physically changes the connections in the brain. It's what neuroscientists call plasticity. It's what makes pinpointing maleness and femaleness so difficult in the brain. I mean, it all depends what we call male and female.
I don't have and never have had a typically female brain or way of thinking.
Interesting. Yeah. In my quest to find a definitive difference between the male and female brain, I keep thinking back to my own brain scan. Ian said I had a typical male brain. What does that actually mean?
I think that the makeup in their brain is that they have to fix something.
Yeah.
If it's broken, we can fix it, we can hunt, we can gather.
I mean, they're drawn to the cars, the crash bang.
So when we talk about the differences, you know, we're looking for the differences between male and female brains. How realistic is that? How much difference is there?
Well, there is a difference, but it's very small and arguably getting smaller But still, we still find differences in performance, and probably the best way to look at it is if you take performance on a language task, for instance. These are individuals or a population. Some people will do very poorly. Some people will do exceptionally well. But most people will perform around here. Now, this might be a distribution of males, for instance. Women, on average, do slightly better at this task.
I see.
So we might get a distribution that looks a little bit like that. So on average, women might generate more words in a certain amount of time than men on average.
It's fascinating, Ian, that there's such a slight difference, that stuff about the human brain rather than male and female brain, because that's not people's perception. When we've been out filming and talking to people, there's a perception that the female brain is going to be radically different. You know, we talk about females being more empathetic and that you're talking more, and the perception is that there is a very different female brain from male brain, yet that doesn't seem to be what I'm seeing here.
Well, that's true. I mean, the differences we can measure are very small. But there's also, on top of that, I think there's a sort of environmental factors, the way people are brought up. There's expectation. If you expect women to be better at emotional exchanges, they probably do them more often and get better at them that way. So we don't know for sure.
Rather than biology.
Practice rather than biology. Exactly.
So we're far more similar than we are different. And a recent study from Tel Aviv confirms that idea. When they scanned 1,400 male and female brains, there was massive overlap in almost every region. This contradicts the idea we've had previously that divides our brains into male and female to match our anatomy, which is the idea being explored in this famous New Zealand painting by Michael Illingworth. Something in the eyes.
You're only looking at the eyes?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I did check that out first. You know, it's clearly about gender, but then since the artist is making it so obviously about gender, are they also making a statement with how much it's the same? You know, triangles for the bodies and round stuff for the head.
Same.
Same arm, yep. We're actually far more alike than we are different. And then those different eyes are starting to say to me, the stuff that we can't see on the inside, the mind, he's representing those is quite different too. Do we think differently as males and females? What do you think? I mean, this is the whole area for you. Do men and women fundamentally think differently? What do you think?
Well, you know, I've got my own personal story around it. I don't have and never have had a typically female brain or way of thinking.
Interesting.
I mean, I'm a living example when it's not that straightforward or easy. When I was born, very atypical genitals, and the young nurse who was the delivery nurse actually picked me up and said, oh my God, it's a hermaphrodite. Like, that's the first words that were used.
Wow.
So the decision then was that I would be given gender identity male. Just before my first birthday, back into hospital, basically cut me open, had a look inside. Oops, there's a uterus. So in a 24-hour period, I went from being my parents' son to my parents' daughter. I would find out afterwards that my mum, who had not been able to talk to me about this, had told my siblings. So they knew, but they didn't know how to talk to me, and they assumed, of course, that I would know.
Although Marnie wasn't told that she was born into sex and was raised as a girl, she knew there was something more to her own story.
I realised I had learned the performance of being female, but I didn't feel particularly female. I didn't feel particularly male either. So I didn't really work out who I was until my 40s. I'm flicking through my Plunkett book, and at the front is Margaret Ruth Laird, but that fell off, and underneath it there's the Bruce Mitchell Laird. I wasn't associating that with me. But I'm looking through this book, and it's got bits cut out of pages. So Mum had obviously gone through and cut out the incriminating bits. But there's 2 pages she missed. Has front teeth, bowel motions, normal, you know, the kind of stuff you write in. He's doing really well. It's like, he's doing really well, like, what? And then just before my First birthday, there's another entry. Seen by doctor, blah, 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 sex determined as female.
Oh, wow. What a story. What a story, Marnie. Marnie now counsels intersex, transgender and other people who don't feel connected to the gender they're born with. So now, after that whole journey, where in your mind does gender sit when the rest of the world is talking about, oh, it's biologically driven?
I still don't think we know yet.
Yeah.
I think we know more than we did 10 years ago, but I think we really don't know what is it that drives this thing around gender. There are obviously biological components.
Right.
But it's obviously a lot more complicated.
Right, yeah. So when we talk about gender, that's not necessarily connected to your anatomical sex.
Absolutely right. There are some really interesting observations that have been made about the differences between gender identity, which is really an internal perception of how you see yourself, whether you see yourself as male or female, and how you appear externally, strongly suggesting that your gender identity, what you perceive yourself as, is not really related to what you look like, and therefore what hormones you've been exposed to, because what you look like is basically a reflection of the hormones you've been exposed to.
So the hormones are reflecting physically what you've got, but your perception of who you are inside your head is not necessarily...
Absolutely. Absolutely. See, there are literally hundreds of children and adolescents who are identifying as transgender, but nevertheless it's probably something that's associated with both environment and with genetic factors.
It's sounding like everyone's got their own particular recipe. When we talk nature, nurture, we're always looking for sort of the same recipe for everyone, but what I'm hearing from you is that...
I think we're all individuals.
All individual.
I think we're all individual.
While the science is changing, those social expectations that mould all our brain connections are changing too. How does your school approach gender in ways that maybe is different from how other schools do that?
We kind of talk about gender being a spectrum, so there's less of an emphasis on abiding to norms, so...
I guess here you're given a much better platform to express yourself. Like, at Wellington High School, I can walk around with my nails painted and no one bats an eye. But when I leave this place and I go and interact with my friends that, say, go to Wellington College, every single time they'll make a comment on it.
Are there some subjects that boys are better at than girls?
Not because of anything to do with the brain, but just because of, like, environmental factors. I think that there are some subjects that boys are more encouraged to do by their peers.
Why are there more, like, male engineers? There's more male scientists. Why is that the case?
I think it's because girls are growing up with not many role models in that area.
So it kind of becomes a vicious cycle where there aren't women in science for young girls to look up to, and then that means that they don't become scientists, so there aren't those role models. And I think if you look at how science is nurtured at a young age, it's kind of in curiosity and going out and kind of looking at things and getting down in the dirt or whatever. And girls aren't really encouraged to do that at a young age.
So what needs to change? What's your generation going to do to make it different from the last generation?
Just not having different expectations, because if they're growing up with expectations put on them, oh, you wear this pink dress and you play with the green Lego toys, you grow up thinking that that's kind of what you have to do, what you have to play with, who you have to be. And I think if we would be able to change what the expectations are around who you have to be that isn't related to gender, I think it could really be effective in creating change.
I started this journey looking for differences in the male and female brain. I thought it would be easy to find them. But I've been amazed to discover the strong feelings we have that we are different are not borne out by looking at our brains. So why would we continue to study sex differences in the brain at all? Well, there is one area medical research says there is a striking difference between male and female brains, and it's an area I have personal experience of.
We've analysed the results.
What are they? I'm dying to find out. If there's one thing we know for sure, brain science is complicated.
If you look at the total number of cells in the brain, it's about 140 billion. It's a lot of cells, but it's about the same as the cells in the liver. Yet we understand the liver much, much better. And the reason why we understand the liver much better than the brain is if you take out one cell from the liver and study it in great detail, you know how the liver works, because all the cells basically do the same thing.
Okay.
And they all work next to each other. Now, if you take out one cell of the brain and study it in great detail, you still have no idea how the brain works, because what's fundamentally different between the brain and the liver is that the brain cells all influence each other. So each individual brain cell talks to about 10,000 other brain cells.
Right.
So if you have one brain cell that talks to 10,000 others, who then talk to 10,000 others, who then talk to... So you can imagine how complex the brain is.
So it's more like a network.
It is a network, exactly, yeah.
The size of the network in here makes it all the more difficult to work out why some neurological disorders are so strongly aligned to gender. Men are more likely to suffer from Parkinson's, women from Alzheimer's. As well as suffering from some disease differently, it's been suggested men and women process pain differently too. So there's research happening now into the development of drugs that aren't one size or gender fits all.
And if you look at brain disorders, it's the same thing. Let's say if we look at the people that get diagnosed with autism, there was a recent study, and in that study, they looked at differences in the symptoms between boys with autism and girls with autism. And there were clear differences. So girls with autism have more problems with recognizing facial expressions, which is a clear sign of autism. Whereas boys had a lot more problems with an interest in sameness. So they hate changes. They like to do the same thing over and over again, very stereotyped behavior. That is much more common in boys than in girls. So the actual situation is more complex.
As a child, I was diagnosed with one of the brain disorders more common in boys. I'm back at Auckland University to talk to Karen Waldie, an expert in disorders like mine. I'm really interested in ADHD. I got diagnosed with that as a child. I always thought it was my superpower. Didn't really perceive it as a disorder.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so...
I mean, your parents did something right. I mean, that's what we try to tell parents.
It was my nana, really, but what can you tell me about that?
Well, ADHD, a neurodevelopmental disorder, another one that's about 3 times more common in males than females.
Karen's going to help me find out if there is any sign of ADHD in my brain now. I'm having an EEG, electroencephalogram, which involves a minor sacrifice. And the electrodes is why I wasn't allowed to put hair product in.
That is correct.
Now I'm appearing on television with no hair product. Not only that, I'm about to be fitted with what looks like a high-tech tea cozy.
Yeah, we do. Extra large, I hear, for all those brains and...
Yeah, that's the theory we'll go with, Karen. So how long is that? The EEG measures brain waves, specifically the time it takes for information to travel between the left and right side of my brain. If I see a dot on either side of the screen, I have to hit the space bar to measure how quickly my brain transfers information between the left and right hemispheres, from my left eye to my right hand, for example. Actually, women are sometimes able to process across the brain a little faster than men, which ties in with our ideas about multitasking. Karen won't be able to tell me the results straight away. First, she'll have to analyse them and compare mine to other people's. Well, there's some activity, so I'm not completely brain dead.
You've got a brain, yeah.
What are they then, just if you could summarise, what are the general patterns that you've found in your research with people with ADHD?
The data change depending on if the person is predominantly inattentive or predominantly hyperactive. What would you possibly be?
I think I've got the H, the hyperactivity.
Hyperactivity. So what we might find then is even shorter right to left transfer times.
Oh, interesting to see how the results compare to the norm.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, I'm off for some fresh air. While I saw my ADHD as a superpower, I know that for many it can be debilitating. Karen's colleague David is showing me a groundbreaking program using brain plasticity that could help improve ADHD symptoms in kids. So why are we exercising, David? I thought we were doing brain things.
Well, the idea here is to be able to create new neurons through physical exercise. We know now that it's a possibility. And so what we're doing here is that we're priming the brain for whatever's coming next.
New neurons. Gotcha.
All right. That's 30 seconds. Let's go again.
After the exercise, my brain is ready for the computer game. Tell me how this helps someone with ADHD playing a video game.
So chances are, if you do have ADHD, your working memory, that is your ability to maintain information in your mind at one point in time, is slightly limited. And so what we're trying to do here with the game is to stretch that just a little bit like we would do with a muscle. So you're back in the math class, you're able to pay attention for longer periods of time and pay attention to more things.
Karen's analysed my results. I'm fascinated to see if my childhood brain disorder can be detected in my adult brain.
Now, when I saw your data, it was kind of interesting because your brain is showing the pattern of what we have published with people with ADHD.
Yay.
So, and specifically those who have that hyperactive type.
Yep.
Yeah, you've got information going very quickly, both left to right and right to left. So,
yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, Karen, looking at gender differences in the brain, does that help us understand, you know, neurological disorders like ADHD?
I think so, yeah. I mean, we've got a lot of people doing some fascinating genetics work, looking at, you know, how it might be that the X chromosome might be protective against these childhood disorders we're talking about, at least the ones that relate to ADHD and autism.
Right.
And then we've got all of this new neuroimaging information. And the Dunedin study is going to give us some fascinating new information about gender differences. They're now brain imaging the whole cohort.
Soon, 1,000 participants in New Zealand's famous Dunedin longitudinal study are having their data from their brain scans analysed, alongside the amazingly rich information contained from 40+ years of life data already collected. Information about their genetics, upbringing, education. That work will be unique and might just turn everything we think we know about the brains of men and women on its head.
People will do studies, and what they'll do is they'll look at the average. And, you know, they might say, on average, a female does this, you know, is better at communicating than a male on average. But what people have to realise that in human populations is that we have a huge scatter, actually, of ability within males and within females.
Difference means difference. It means not the same. It does not mean better or worse.
Absolutely, okay.
It's just not the same.
Yeah. And traditionally, if we look at gender differences, it was always the idea that men are better at this, or females are better at that. And that touches our fundamental understanding and our pride, perhaps, as well. And I think that always makes it more controversial.
We can learn a lot from looking at male brains and looking at female brains, but then looking at how our brains are similar or how different abilities overlap will be an important way forward. So I look forward to seeing more on that kind of approach.
This has been an amazing and exciting journey. I think the most incredible thing is the difference between people's perception of how different we are and the reality that, to our brains at least, we're really far more similar than we are different. One of the biggest things confirmed for me, we really are shaped by the experiences we have and what we do throughout our lives. So the challenge for us is how can we make the most of that opportunity and not be limited by it, especially when it comes to gender. Power.